My name is Albert Marshall, and I am from the Moose Clan. And I am from Mi'kma'ki, our Mi'kmaq and holistic territory here in the Maritimes, which encompasses New Brunswick, part of Maine, part of Quebec, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia. That is our territory.
My name is Morgan. I am the Indigenous Program Coordinator for LSF. I am mixed race, Indigenous. I am a member of Henvey Inlet First Nation in Northern Ontario. And today we have invited you to speak to talk a bit about Etuaptmumk and how it applies to education. We'd love to hear your wisdom and your thoughts on that. And we have a few guiding questions to steer our conversation. So having heard you speak in other interviews in the past, you talk a lot about how Mother Earth is in danger, and that the youth are the key to helping her. And we'd just like to know, what can the youth do, and how can adults and community support them?
The most logical answer I can give you on that is that not at this point in general, but students in the universities. We can somehow talk to them and share with them this concept of Etuaptmumk, or Tuaisin. And how can that concept enable them to see the problems when we talk about environment or education? What are their reflections on that? And if all is well said and done, depending on the population of that institution, if they would somehow come together and draft up either a petition or a declaration to the government outlining their concerns, and more than likely, once they are very clear on the issues, in which I think it's obvious to say that the environment is in trouble, because with the rate of extraction and consumption, we have compromised the carrying capacity of the system, as well compromised the cleansing with the rate of extraction, and we also compromised the cleansing capacity of the system with the rate of injections of toxins. And hopefully, as they are enlightened on the issue, they will also be, in their reflections, come up with some solutions as to how can we not completely eradicate, but at least put a dent into it, of suggesting alternatives to extractions. Because it's a common knowledge that we do have a common objective. Any project that anyone pursues, I believe there is a degree of expectations that this project will generate economic opportunities for people. But it depends on the project. We have to consider the automation. With the automation, I think it will limit a lot of this physical labor that has to be involved, and increase the efficiency of that project. Therefore, we will just then be digging our own graves, in other words, because I think we are now in the environmental crisis, if she can regenerate herself and if she cannot cleanse herself, how can we, people that are mostly dependent upon her, be able to, how will we be sustained? In other words, unless something somewhat drastic done at this point in time to allow her to regenerate herself and to cleanse herself, what will we be leaving for the future generations? And according to our inherent responsibilities is to be constantly considering the impact of our actions, in which it will not compromise the future generations of their abilities to sustain themselves, to enjoy nature, and to learn from nature. So this is probably about the best way that I can suggest in doing, because action is required now. Now, here we are using the concept of Etuaptmumk. Etuaptmumk is an action-oriented concept. If you look at a project, you first of all look at it, is this project ecologically sustainable? And if it's not, then I don't believe Etuaptmumk will change anything. And once we agree on that this is not ecologically sustainable, why don't we come together and see if we can come up with an alternative that will meet the objectives? The other area that I believe which would be very much suitable for the Aboriginal people, because they're very cognizant of the state of the environment. If we can come up with a plan using science to begin to mitigate all those damages and harms that we have created to date, and mitigate them, whether it's forestry, whether it's residues of things that have been, especially in the oil industry. It might be very efficient for them of locating and determining the quantity of oil in there. They use that word fracking. But in order for them to frack one well, they will require 8 million gallons of fresh water and approximately 160 compounds of chemicals. And after it's being used, it's so heavily contaminated that it can't even be put back into the system. So they do have holding ponds. And those holding ponds are storing a lot of millions and millions of gallons of effluent. And no doubt, in my humble opinion, that some of that actually will drain into the aquifers, which could very well contaminate our drinking waters. And look at, science is a wonderful knowledge and tool we have, but I believe we have been using that science as an arm of destruction, which will create something that will be very efficient in extraction. And more than likely, the proponents will be able to maximize their profits. And the other area that I believe that needs to be considered, of course, is money is a tool we all need. we have to question the governments in their space exploration ideas. They're literally spending millions, billions, and billions of dollars exploring space to find life. But yet, they're spending trillions, trillions, and trillions of dollars killing the life here on Earth. Someone has to be determined enough to say, we can't allow to continue in this manner. We have to come up with better ways of creating economic opportunities without causing so much harm to the very source of life in which we all depend upon. Because not only nature is interconnected, interdependent, but also our social and economic lives are all interconnected, interdependent. So that if she is not healthy and productive, what would it matter that we can fine-tune the technology to be efficient in something in which it would create a lot of benefits for a select few. So this is I believe something that is worth pondering to empower and motivate people, because it's obvious from my perspective that looking at the injustices, whether they're social or environmental, they're using our silences as if we're condoning of what they are doing. Now, luckily, here in Nova Scotia, they managed to put enough pressure on the premier of not allowing a golf course to go into this one particular area. And because golf courses are very, very effective of increasing toxins into the system, in which they're not compelled to divulge the kind of chemicals that they are using. And once the assessment is done, then there are no more restrictions to that company or to the golf course of informing anyone. They can increase their efforts without due consideration. And Etuaptmumk, or 2IC, it's an ideal concept of guiding us into the future, in which if we look at a project and we quickly realize that this project is not ecologically sustainable, why would we continuously look at it from that paradigm without trying to come up with a solution or another idea in which it will generate economic opportunities, but it will not be as harmful to the very source of life in which we all depend upon? And I know this is a mouthful, but I believe the reason why we are in such a state, they only look at environment or anything in an abstract way, in which most people, especially Aboriginal people, look at it from the holistic perspective. It's not just the river or the land there, but also, do we actually know the impact it will have on the other non-human relatives? Because if we don't look at the source of the problem and how can that source be mitigated and restored, only then I believe we will be, for once in our lives, develop or come up with initiatives that will be in harmony with nature. Because when we look at our whole history, that responsibility was built into the, well, whatever form of education system they would have had from the early age on. People will be taught and encouraged to consistently consider the impact of their actions. And if somehow an individual or a group creates disharmony, then we have a mind to use to mitigate and to restore that damage or to replace what was taken. So education system, I believe, had played a major role into our current state of mind towards the very source of life in which we all depend upon. Let's use something that is very effective for us. And this concept is to I see. Again, if something is not ecologically sustainable, we suggest that this concept then shouldn't be used in that way, but rather we have a mind which no other creature has. We have the ability of working with science, and it's very clear for the Aboriginal ways of thinking because we agree science is a wonderful knowledge and tool we have. But unfortunately, science cannot look at nature as we do. Science can only look at nature as an object. So therefore, people that are on a ground level, there's no connection to that to them. So there's no consideration to take care of it. But if we could somehow overlay traditional knowledge into the teaching of science, in which traditional knowledge will highlight the fact that we're dealing with a subject here, something that's alive. And anything that's alive has to be nurtured, appreciated, and taken care of. Because it has survived for a long period of time without human intervention. And for too long, the education system did a wonderful job of educating us to be a number one extractor. And therefore, the students are taught only to think about, to maximize their efforts. They'll have to be thinking of quantity versus quality. And even some of the highest scholars in this country, and that when one of them was Murray Sinclair, when he said, it's the education system that got us into this mess. And it has to be the education system that will get us out of it. Which means, to my understanding, we have to transform this system to benefit humanity, but also being very effective of being in harmony with nature. And since we have a mind which no other creature has. It reminds us we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. But that's why we have a mind to mitigate and to restore the damage that we do individually or collectively. So through what we call through tea diplomacy, we begin to come together and see if we can come up with an idea as to what can we do. So the first thing that was done was bring that question to the elders within that geographical area. What do we need for our students to go into sciences? They did not say increase the content, but rather they were very emphasized that by weaving traditional knowledges into the institution. And the students were, they weren't great. Initially we only had about 26. But from there on, those students that graduated from that integrated science program were quickly picked up by an organization called UIN now, Unamagi Institute of Natural Resources. And what they have learned in that classroom to constantly weave traditional knowledge, not just into science, but in all disciplines. And through time, it became essential that the task was getting bigger and greater. Another organization had to be formed called CEPI, Collaborative Environmental Planning Initiative. And their main function was talking to the governments, ministers, deputy ministers, federal, provincial, municipal, churches, industries, and etc., of trying to educate them that whatever the initiative is, we have to be very mindful that the action will not supersede the laws of nature. They will always be mindful that whatever project that they embrace has to be ecologically sustainable. Otherwise, there's nothing you can do with it. I just come back from a conference in Toronto on that. And sadly, though, it's not resonating. For example, it has taken close to 30 years before the simple concept of 2IC was resonating. And it's a very simple concept. Everybody has two eyes. And everybody has their own perspectives based on their culture, language, and so on. And with hopes that once they engage into that mindset, they will quickly realize that you cannot go through life with one perspective, especially when you're working with the system like environment, constantly changing. That we have to be very mindful of what we do so that our actions, to the best of our human ability, try to balance our actions with the laws of nature, because she has through that way in which I believe the term biodiversity was the overarching objective. By maintaining the integrity of biodiversity, you will then have a healthy and a productive environment. So again, without going into much detail, UINR has been very successful in applying that concept, whether it's fishery, whether it's forestry, whether it's moose hunting or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And I'm sure there's other ways of exploring the objectives of those organizations. Now, because the main emphasis here is that people in a certain geographical area will become intimately knowledgeable and connected to that environment. So the concepts are very much inherent to that certain geographical area because of the diversity of nature. And if people are immersed in it, intimately connected and so on with nature, they will know exactly areas that have been heavily impacted. But as yet, we have a long ways to go yet because we need our own scientists in which they will be educated onto methodologies that nature has rights, we humans have responsibilities, and that nature has its own ways of sustaining itself. And we have to somehow find a way as to how can we maintain the integrity of that. And the only and the fastest way is that if we can somehow get the education systems to make sure that land-based education has to become official in all levels of education, because through the technology's advancements, I'm sure a lot of people have become disconnected from nature. And here, through this discipline, we hope that it could reconnect them with nature. And even we talk about food security. Once their enthusiasm is triggered, I'm sure they would get involved in simple things like tree planting, community gardening. And we hope that through community gardening, people will not only be growing vegetables, but they will also be growing friendships. Because whatever you grow, you have to barter, exchange. And that will require a relationship of some kind. Because through something, we have become disconnected. We have lost this community spirit. And we actually are embracing this paradigm called dependency syndrome, in which people depend on someone else to do the task that they should be doing. So by overhauling our current education system, in which everyone will be empowered and educated how to coexist with this wonderful creation of ours in a harmonious way. I think, as we are very much aware, that there has been a lot of inferences or references being made that we have two worlds, a mainstream world and an Aboriginal world. But we all know in reality, it's only one world. So through these simple concepts like Etuaptmumk to I seen, the objective of it is, how can we use this simple concept to unite us, in which we will embrace and welcome our differences in a good way, so that each and every one of us would be pondering or wondering if we can fathom for a moment how our lives would be if we can somehow find a way and humble ourselves to work together for the benefit of all. And that benefit of all, I think, to me, is very powerful concept, because it means our efforts will not only benefit humanity, but it would also benefit our non-human relatives, because they are our source of life. And if we consider them, I'm more than sure that our actions will have to change, in which every action will be considered, what impact it may have, and try to eliminate those impacts. Because all Aboriginal people are saying our inherent responsibility now is to ensure that the next 7 generations would benefit our efforts now, as compared to what we currently have. No one is talking about it or thinking about it. The degree of deficit that we are leaving to the future generations. And I'm more than sure that these young minds are thinking about those things. And I was very elated during that 2 or 3 day conference in Truro. The number of young people that have demonstrated in so many different ways, without saying it, but looking at their efforts. They are no longer going to be, they're not going to allow themselves to be disconnected and to be in silence of what's happening. They're taking it upon themselves now of creating a better life for all. Because this is something I think that has been missing for all people, not just Aboriginal people. That education system will not only generate something in which they could adequately sustain themselves in this technological world, but also they would be able to subsidize their food supplies through nature. Because with this abundance of dependency syndrome, we don't even know what we're eating half of the time, because every food we eat, they depend on some kind of chemicals to expedite the growth. So it can produce much more food in a short period of time. And in the meantime, we're eradicating species without due consideration. What will be the biological impact it would have on a biodiversity if these species have been as these species have been eradicated? And how do we use concepts like interconnectivity, interdependency? We're all independent, interconnected in one way or the other. And that simple concept, I believe, could be used to empower and encourage the young people to pursue what they believe will help them of transforming how we sustain ourselves. Because especially for us, because demographically, we people in advanced age are minority within a minority. Demographically, we're told that 80% of our population is under 30. And I kind of believe that because here in my community of 5,000, there's less than 65 of us that are over 65, that are over 65 years of age. The rest of them are young. And along the way, that was also considered of providing resources for our own Aboriginal students, of having elders available to them, in which universities were encouraged to have in staff an elder residence, because here you generate an opportunity for the young generations to learn from this elder what they had to do in sustaining themselves without compromising the integrity of the area. So it's sadly to say that in our urgency to conclude something, we're only now can think in an abstract way, but not in a holistic way. Every action is going to have a profound impact, not just for us, for the food that we rely on, but for the rest of the food chain. If people were to truly listen, when we try to include our traditional knowledges into the system, all we're trying to say is that our knowledge alone ultimately would not make any impact. It's by putting all those knowledges that we have somehow managed, the knowledge and wisdom that we managed to acquire from others, then the traditional knowledges will then be very much part of that. Because if all these knowledges were to be working together, I think it would create a very, very profound difference as how we do things, how we sustain ourselves, and empower ourselves not to be silent anymore if there's any injustices, social or environmental. This is what I'm hearing the young people are saying. They're not going to put up with that. They're going to make sure that their voices are going to be heard. But there's a lot of things that got to be done on that issue. For example, those students that are aggressively pursuing something in a good way, they should be somehow protected. The Aboriginal professors have to be protected. The whistleblowers have to be protected, because whistleblowers are the eye and the ear and voice, how to coexist in this complex world with the environment. So there is a lot of ways that, it might sound complicated, and maybe it is, but this is how we envision. How can we meet our objectives in this transformation? We talk about transformation. We talk about revolution, not revolution with a sword, but revolution with a pen and a technology. These things here, and the young people are experts in those. Let's look at our differences, not in a negative way, but look at our differences. So when we walk together in one world, not only us, but the system will allow us to mutually respect the uniqueness that each and every one of us are bringing forth, rather than use that differences in a negative way. Yes, we are different in so many biologically and so on. We're different. And the reason why we are different is because each culture was given certain responsibilities. And for those responsibilities to be shared equally and collectively, in which I have no say of who I am. And no matter what, I cannot change that. And if I deny it, then I'm in big trouble, because I would be saying to my creator, look here, sister, how come you made a mistake here? She never makes any mistakes. Each and every one of us are special. And what makes us special is because the uniqueness that we have, the gifts that we have, and for those gifts to be used mutually in a respectful way. We have to be mindful of walking gently in our geographical area, because any impact we create here ultimately and inevitably will affect the other areas. So by constantly promoting unity, then I believe with unity we will be strong, we will be effective. I have to humbly express my appreciation for allowing me to share some of the knowledges and the wisdoms that have been shared with me by my ancestors and all the wonderful people, knowledgeable people I met in my journey.